Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Top Gun, Mastered, by Michael Anderle, narrated by Eva Wilhelm. Chapter 1. Mia's cannon tore through the enemy fighter, strafing her from above. She shoved her craft down with a quick burst from her thrusters, escaping the debris cloud threatening to take her to hell along with her prey. Bright flashes pushed back the darkness of space around her as enemies fell to the wrath of her flight mates. Sensors showed clouds of missile and cannon fire. A scorched chunk of a wing hurtled toward her. She twisted her fighter, missing it by too little distance. She hadn't survived the ambush to die from a debris collision. "Come on," she muttered. "You assholes need to understand you're not going to win this." Her heart thundered. Her last sensor check confirmed her team was still outnumbered 3-1 after the latest wave of destruction. She'd wanted to avoid using hyperfocus mode, but she wasn't sure how long they could hold out without her special ability. The risk-to-reward ratio changed with each passing second. Mia turned her fighter to throw off a stream of shots from a trailing enemy craft. A hard spin and quick shot sheared off the fighter's engines, sending it spiraling out of control. It smashed into an engine blown off another fighter earlier and exploded. She slowed her momentum with counterthrust in time to nail a second approaching fighter with a cannon burst that tore through the center of his craft. There was no explosion this time. That didn't matter. A pilot with a dead fighter was nothing more than another chunk of space debris to dodge, an obstacle rather than a threat. Her flight wasn't deployed in sword and shield formation. After another dance with the closest enemies, they reformed in a diamond with Mia positioned at the top. "This can't be worth it to them," Mia exclaimed. "I don't care what bounties are being offered for us." "Should I come in closer with the Erinyes?" Ito called. "If we take too many shots at this distance, we risk hitting the flight." "No." Mia glared at the large contact at the far edge of her current sensor displays, a fueling station. "We only got lucky that they jumped the gun with their inslide and we could launch before they damaged the ship. We're in the middle of nowhere except for that station, and we can't be certain it isn't compromised." She suppressed a shudder. They'd been fortunate on their missions to avoid the worst-case scenario of the Erinyes suffering heavy damage in the middle of nowhere. They had far too many enemies to trust blind SOS calls. Self-sufficiency was why her team had lasted so long against the massive conspiracy threatening the galaxy, the Pluribus Draconis Protocol. "We saved their asses big time at that station," Ito countered. "They owe us. I think you're reading too much into this. These bastards aren't good enough to be from the Protocol or KCAP Special Forces. Merc's looking for a payday, I guarantee it." "We won't risk the ship unless we have no other choice," Mia stated before risking a near point-blank missile launch. Her target tried to dive and drop a decoy. The missile struck the decoy, but the fighter was so close the explosion shredded the back engines, leaving the craft tumbling out of control. Mia finished him off with 2 cannon shots. She was annoyed that she'd ended up in a surprise deep space brawl with a swarm of enemies. Their most recent missions had taken them into the KCAP, infiltrating conspiracy bases and dangerous underground weapons auctions. A simple trip to a friendly refueling station shouldn't have ended up with the team in a pitched life-or-death battle. Mia growled, wondering if she should have guessed it was inevitable. She would have been willing to chalk it up to bad luck if it weren't for 2 other ambushes in as many weeks. The last 2 hadn't been that bad, featuring single flights of half-assed merc pilots in antique ships who must have specialized in terrorizing unarmed farmers based on their skill levels. Those encounters were annoying, but more like training sims than serious threats. Her team had collected a good amount of scrap after the battles, leaving them better off except for fuel. In contrast, a full squadron equipped with modern fighters popping out of side space to run at them was a serious challenge. Running wouldn't work. At this range, the enemy would collapse the envelope with a missile barrage. She still needed the fuel she'd come here for. Mia had gotten too comfortable using the same stations in the fringe. Despite her paranoia and anger, Ito was right. The station likely hadn't betrayed them. The problem was that having friendly ports of call was too convenient for the prey and the hunter. It left an easy trail for an enemy to follow. The conspiracy punching back after losing a base and their pet arms dealer was inevitable. No war could remain one-sided for long. Ryoko's and Karen's crossfire ripped through an unlucky fighter. A barrage of missiles forced Mia's diamond formation into a dancing, wiggling mess of turning and hard-burning fighters, filling space with more decoy pods. She hissed as the constant acceleration and direction changes pushed and pulled on her body. These fights always gave her more respect for her friends without her genetic enhancements, who could still put up with the G-forces. A trio of enemies descended on an isolated Paul. His twisting, erratic flight might have looked like drunk flying from the outside, but he escaped the enemy cannon fire. Missiles exploding on his decoys gave him a brief respite since his attackers had to roll out of the way of the new debris clouds. Mia cut across a group of fighters, taking glancing hits. Ignoring the minor damage warnings popping up on her HUD, she accelerated and launched a barrage of missiles at Paul's tormentors. As soon as they turned and released their decoys, she raked the center of their formation. Her distant shot didn't blow the fighter apart, but it careened out of control, making it an easy pickup for Ryoko. Since capturing Jabal Voorhees, Mia had dealt with 3 ambushes in the fringe, many light years apart. It was hard to ignore that proof of the conspiracy's resources. Mia had closed in on the conspiracy, which made her more vulnerable to her cornered enemy. The conspiracy was lashing out, demonstrating their reach. So far, they'd only sent mercs and privateers at her. How long before a squadron of Reapers showed up? Mia rolled her fighter to throw off the man behind her. She turned, not bothering to attempt clever, quick spins, and wove through the curtain of fire from the flight bearing down on her. "You need help," John transmitted. "Let me deploy my special weapon before it's too late." "This isn't the time for a damned debate," Mia shouted. She twisted her fighter and narrowly avoided a collision, all but skimming the top of the other fighter. With a grunt and a perfectly timed lateral thruster burst, she shoved her fighter in line with the retreating foe and blew him apart. "All fighters, back into formation. We're going to get picked off if we stay like this." "What now?" A sensor spike preceded a side space envelope opening and a corvette pushing through with another 2 flights of fighters in tow. Despite their efforts, Mia's flight was more outnumbered than when they started the battle. "This isn't the time to play it safe," John countered. "I'm not going to sit here while you get killed." At least he didn't do what he wanted anymore. A serious beating, followed by a heart-to-heart discussion, had worked. Unfortunately, they'd had this same debate since the last attack. Despite all his superhuman abilities, John was still a novice pilot, and natural talent didn't trump experience. Her flight did well because of both talent and training. They'd worked together since their academy days and knew their strengths, weaknesses, and reaction times. Adding a new element to the mix would risk tactical effectiveness at a time when they needed to be at their best. Not only that, getting the most out of a fighter required a tuned neural interface helmet. Ito maintained the flight's helmets, but their fundamental tuning had been set up before Mia and her friends had left the Navy. They lacked the equipment and expertise to do that from scratch, and hiring someone to mess around with neural tuning was too dangerous when they couldn't go to a fuel station without an ambush. Mia hadn't forgotten how Icarus had turned Rainier and her friends against her by manipulating their neural interfaces. There was another fundamental issue. They only had 4 fighters. Constant battles without pay had taken their toll on the team's finances. All those issues combined left a distressed John out of ship-to-ship battles. Ito and Debbie, too, could handle the Erinyes without his help. Mia had dismissed John's earlier complaints on practical grounds. She'd never anticipated he'd go to Ito and harass her for help. The engineer had used spare scrap and parts collected from the aftermath of battles and scrounging to put together a fleet of combat drones. Ito had mentioned being inspired by what she saw from the Bleakers. Mia didn't know what to make of that, but the last time Ito had been inspired, she'd created sneak mode. Sometimes talented people were best left to pursue their ideas. "Flight, pull back," Mia ordered. "I'll cover you and join up at the Erinyes. We don't have a choice now but to engage them with all our forces." "Roger," her flight mates called. Mia swept toward the enemy squadron. The staccato firing of the rest of her missiles pushed the enemies apart. The explosions and decoys filled the nearby space with debris. None of her missiles connected with her targets, but two fighters collided and broke apart in their mad dash to escape. The corvette and fighter reinforcements increased speed. She didn't have long until the reinforcements joined the fray. John transmitted, "If we're using all our forces, we should use my 3 squadrons of SHKs." "What's an SHK?" Paul asked. "Space Hunter Killer," John proudly replied. "Giving drones a fancy name doesn't make them better." From what Ito had told Mia, the SHKs were not much more than moving targets with short-range, low-powered lasers. From thrusters to sensors, everything was crude and hacked together. Although they were impressive considering their source materials, they weren't cutting-edge military technology. The bleaker inspiration had made its way into the design by linking all the drones together, which also made up for their pathetic sensors. The operator could rely on the product of dozens of smaller sensors joined together. Individual control of dozens of drones was impossible, requiring automated thruster adjustments and drone-to-drone ranging to avoid collisions. John could control his squadrons like deadly schools of piranhas. All the automation worried Mia. Not directly piloting the individual drones meant a greater risk for problems. Individual SHKs could blunder into friendly lines of fire no matter what Ito and John said. Overwhelmed, Mia slipped into hyperfocus. Every second stretched out, making the movements of the enemy fighters more obvious. With the chaos of missile spread still afflicting the enemy squadron, she swept across their front line to squeeze aimed energy blasts into their cockpits to ensure kills. She was out of mercy. 2 of her shots hit dead on, leaving out-of-control wrecks speeding away and forcing course corrections by their allies. The third fighter turned in time to avoid a direct shot to the cockpit, but lost its primary engines, leaving it crippled. Mia took the chance to break away from the rain of enemy return fire and dart toward the Erinnyes. The ship's turrets spun toward the enemies and laid down a river of fire. Standing orders were to save missiles unless there was no other choice. Lethal ordnance was expensive. The enemy fighters broke into 2 formations. A double envelopment would play to their numbers. "I've tested the SHKs," John insisted. "We don't have much time. Come on, I can help." His testing consisted of a handful of uncontested flights in deep space. All his combat training was limited to simulations with dubious assumptions. Right now, she needed to neutralize the enemy's major advantage. Streams of turret fire from the Erinnyes kept the enemy at a distance, but their reinforcements would be there soon, leaving her forces surrounded and outnumbered. "1 squadron authorized," Mia shouted with a slight slur. Even after all this time, she sometimes had trouble speaking while under hyperfocus. "It'll work better with 2, John replied. "Prove you're useful with 1, then we'll talk." Mia put more distance between her fighter and the enemy front line. She took full advantage of her hyperfocus to register the incoming fire and get her fighter out of the way. SHKs flowed from the Erinnyes in an eerie, swirling pattern reminiscent of deploying bleaker drones. The SHK squadron spread out more evenly and swept toward a pair of enemy fighters. The fighters let loose on the approaching drone swarm. John spun the entire formation in a dizzying display, saving the SHKs from the initial volleys. The short-range weapons of the drones meant the enemy fighters had extra time to whittle away at the formation. Despite another impressive spin and twist of the entire formation, cannon fire tore through the side of the formation, vaporizing SHKs. John closed the distance. His SHKs flattened into a V formation and opened fire, raking the enemy fighters. The low-powered weapons didn't punch through like a plasma cannon, instead peeling away layers of the armor and fuselage. A lucky hit on the engine sent a fighter spiraling out of control and into his too-close wingman for a massive explosion. "Yes!" John cheered. "Don't get cocky," Mia warned while turning to fire at approaching fighters with her cannon. "You're authorized to deploy a 2nd squadron. Everyone else, form up on me. We're going sword and shield on the starboard side of the Erinnyes. The SHKs will cover port. Ito will concentrate forward fire on the approaching corvette to discourage them from joining the party." "Roger." Mia's head throbbed. Too much talking while in hyperfocus, she guessed. She pushed the pain away into a distant corner of her consciousness. She couldn't spare mental processing in the middle of an intense battle. Karen, Paul, and Ryoko picked off more enemies before rejoining Mia in their well-honed sword and shield formation. They charged the enemy fighters. If the SHKs were schools of piranhas, Mia became an erratic spitting cobra, jerking here and there to spit her venom in the form of concentrated plasma blasts. Her flightmates let loose with a coordinated barrage. Pinned by Mia's hyperfocus-enhanced cannon fire and relentless turret support from the Erinyes, the enemy couldn't do much except die. Explosions riddled their formation. Plasma blasts tore fighter after fighter apart, leaving gaps in the encirclement. On the opposite side, John's SHK squadrons pushed into a melee with the other fighters. The squadrons crisscrossed paths while spinning, throwing off the aim of their targets. The volleys of cannon fire poked holes in the angry swarm before the SHKs closed to deliver their deadly bites. The SHK squadrons cut back and forth. Mia could almost see them as paired daggers. A group of SHKs rammed into a fighter threatening to escape the cordon. The collision left a trail of debris and a fighter tumbling out of control, unable to do anything as the rest of the swarm blasted through it. Mia kept up her fury, every slight adjustment of her thrusters setting her up for another shot at a new enemy. Suppressive waves from her flight joined with those from the Erinyes to slice through space and any enemies unfortunate enough to be in the way. As the SHK squadrons cut through the fighters with relentless offense, the squadrons shrank, losses mounting. She'd seen this in John's combat training, all aggression with advancing, multifold attacks, and not much concern about how much damage he might be taking. Blasting through another fighter, Mia flicked her attention to the medium-range threats, wondering why she didn't have to dodge turret fire. The corvette had enough time to close in and join the fray. Instead, it had reversed course, leaving its fighter contingent to join the dwindling forward force. A flurry of turret fire from the Erinyes blew away a bold enemy who tried to charge Mia's flight. The surviving enemy fighters pulled back with long, arcing escape paths interspersed with decoy launches. Mia dropped out of hyperfocus. Let them go. She checked her HUD and flight telemetry. We got scraped up more than I would have liked, and we've lost SHKs. You sure? Paul asked. They might be back. We didn't lose anybody. They lost a lot of people and fighters. If they thought they could win, they'd press their attack instead of running. We push forward, and it'll be hard to avoid more damage with the corvette involved. Mia's force slowed, letting the mothership and the fighters pull farther away until the corvette opened a sidespace envelope. The ambush party fled through sidespace, now barely outnumbering Mia's force. Everybody back to the Erinyes, Mia ordered. She let out a sigh of relief. It's time to get the damned fuel we came here for. John, good job. I told you, he declared. Remember what I said about getting cocky? Mia stepped onto the bridge, frowning. She hadn't changed out of her flight suit other than hanging her helmet in the bay. Something had felt off, and she wanted to be ready. Now she understood what it was. Why haven't we docked at the station yet? Ito looked over from the pilot's seat. Because the station has refused our docking request. The station manager said, and I quote, "You don't get any fuel from me. Please go." Mia narrowed her eyes. What the hell? We've used the station plenty of times, and they owe us. That was before we brought a battle to their doorstep. We pushed away a battle from their doorstep before this. Mia scoffed. What, we were supposed to let those bastards blow us away? She shook her head and ground her teeth. Enough was enough. Ito, line us up with a dock latch. They're not clearing us, Ito repeated. You sure you want to make them mad? That's not the right question. What is the right question? Are they sure they want to make me mad? Ito gave her a cool look. If the station were in on the ambush, they would have waited until we were aboard rather than risk this big battle. I didn't say they were in on the ambush. Mia glared at a feed of the station. I'm pissed because they won't fuel us up. Just line us up with the docking hatch. That'll keep us external if we need to run fast. Do I want to ask what comes next? Debbie, too, can you force it? We've been here enough, and I'm annoyed, but I'd prefer not to damage this place if I can avoid it. Yes, love. It'll be trivial for me to open the hatch. Then we'll do that, Mia stated. The flight will stay on standby. Charlie, John, and I will have a conversation with the station manager. Ito stared at Mia with an uncertain look in her eyes. Seriously, are you sure about this? Don't do this just because you're pissed. The manager here isn't like the overseer where I came from. We need the fuel. We are pushing it as is. I'm sure once I talk to the station manager face to face, we can resolve this without trouble. The last time you had an angry conversation with the station manager, you blew the station up. Mia stomped toward the door. Then this guy better not piss me off. Mia stepped out of the airlock with her hand on her holster. She didn't want trouble, but that didn't mean she'd let herself get ambushed again. She agreed with Ito's analysis that station management wasn't cooperating with the ambushers. That didn't mean the ambushers hadn't left men behind for a second bite at the apple. No one waited outside the airlock. She heard labored breathing and boots scraping on metal nearby. They were waiting around the corner. There was no whirring or clanking suggesting combat drones. She wasn't that worried. 3 super soldiers could win against whatever the station threw at them. She hoped it wouldn't come to that. Mia motioned for Charlie and John to follow her. No one does anything until I say so. I want to give him a chance to explain himself. She locked eyes with John. Understood? Understood. Good. You did well with the SHKs. Let's not ruin that. Mia peeked around the corner. A wall of beefy station security guards stood in front of the sweaty station manager. All were armed, although all their pistols remained in their holsters. She headed around the corner with slow, deliberate movements. The guards tensed. No one went for their weapons, but some looked like they regretted that after Charlie came around the corner. I wish you hadn't forced me to do this, Mia declared. The station manager stepped forward, pushing the guards out of his way. You shouldn't have forced your way aboard. I made my feelings clear. Mia waited until Charlie and John were beside her. You shouldn't have shut me out. I don't understand how assholes ambushing me translates into you not letting me fuel my ship here. She gestured at the wall. We didn't get close to the station. You didn't take damage in the fight. If you're mad at anyone, you should be mad at whoever they were for jumping somebody so close to the station. They were with the Golden Blade, the manager declared. They contacted us right after their arrival, making it clear they didn't intend to involve the station. How nice for you. Mia frowned. Is that name supposed to mean something to me? The name sounded familiar, but she couldn't place it. She was sure they hadn't tried to kill her before. She never forgot anyone who tried to murder her. He rubbed his wrist. You and I have gotten along well in the past, and I've allowed you here despite your spotty reputation and fluctuating bounty situation, but... He squared his shoulders. Don't you get it? Those weren't ragtag mercs. They are a top-level privateer outfit that takes many official K-Cap jobs. So? Mia shrugged. Why should I care about the K-Cap out here in the fringe? This isn't K-Cap territory. The manager grimaced. He opened and closed his mouth a couple of times as he gathered his thoughts. The Golden Blade has worked directly with the K-Cap Navy in the past. They are a preferred privateer company for fringe work. In other words, they do the K-Cap's dirty work when the higher-ups don't want to look bad in the fringe. She snorted. For a bunch of guys who are supposed to be a crack outfit, I wasn't impressed. It'll only be minor repairs. The manager looked exasperated. Don't you understand? Fighting the Golden Blade is one step away from fighting the K-Cap Navy. The manager shook his head. I understand you've had troubles with them in the past. You might not care, but this station doesn't need that kind of trouble. We can't deal with the hostile K-Cap Navy presence. Mia threw her head back and laughed. Can you believe this, Charlie? She waved at the manager. "It's not that we helped each other, or because I showed up and paid for fuel. Remember a while back when I risked my team and ship to beat back a pirate raid on this place? It wasn't that long ago." She stepped forward, pausing when the guards dropped their hands to their guns. "I even went to the trouble of hunting those pirates down so they wouldn't come back and wipe this place out." She glared at the manager. "I didn't have to do that. It's not like you paid me the amount I would have earned as a privateer working that contract. Discounts on fuel and your gratitude, both of which don't mean much. You know who didn't do anything to help you? The K-Cap Navy." Charlie bared his teeth. No loyalty, no respect, no strength. "I understand that," the manager replied. "I appreciate your past efforts. That doesn't change the fact the situation has changed. You and your crew are more dangerous to this place than pirates. I have to put the good of the station and our crew above anything else. I would think you, of all people, would understand that." "I'm tired of people betraying me." Mia's hand edged toward her gun. "I came for fuel, and I'm damned well going to get fuel. If I'm as dangerous as a pirate, maybe I should act like one." The guards spread out. They gripped their guns, but no one looked eager to be the first man to draw and risk being shot. "You son of a bitch!" Mia shouted. "I'm not going to take this!" She blinked, stumbled back, and collapsed like a hammer had hit her. Her last thought was a realization she'd pushed her hyperfocus too hard. She passed out before she hit the deck. Chapter 2. Mia awoke to a familiar ceiling. It was a small comfort in a confusing situation following a tense encounter. The smell and feel here weren't foreign. She lay in her bunk, her breathing slow. The post-stasis coma lethargy always made it hard to roll right back into action. A forced coma made it worse. Mia sucked in a breath. She'd screwed up. It had been a while since she'd messed up this badly. She'd abused her hyperfocus during the battle. Going to the station was idiotic. She had insisted that John learn to control his emotions, yet she went off half-cocked to threaten a former ally while not at her best. Worst of all, somebody else had to clean up her mess. She knew that, even if she wasn't sure who it was yet. Mia sat up with a groan and rubbed her temples. She didn't mind risking her life, but her mistake could have cost a crew member their life. That wasn't acceptable. She'd come far since leaving the Navy with her friends. They'd gathered a crew of specialists and struck blows against the conspiracy and aliens threatening humanity. She'd risked all that success over her aggrieved and entitled bout of petty, childish anger. "Disgusting," she whispered. A commander couldn't lead with her emotions. A commander had to focus on rational situational analysis of risk and objectives. All actions needed to be based on those considerations. Mia couldn't tolerate such behavior from herself or anybody else. Righteous fury and vengeance guided her mission, but it needed to be cold and calculated, a well-honed blade that sliced away the darkness to leave only the light. Lately, she'd been more like a rough-hewn axe tossed carelessly toward her enemies. Spilling their blood had become enough. She'd forgotten what was important. An unpleasant stench drifted into her nostrils. Unfortunately, the smell wasn't unfamiliar to anyone who spent too many hours in a flight suit without hitting the showers afterward. There were some problems that engineers and scientists hadn't bothered to deal with, insisting that the most straightforward solution was the best. Wrinkling her nose, Mia rolled out of her bunk and walked toward her shower and toilet. That gave her time to take stock of the situation. She was alive and aboard the ship. That meant they weren't in the worst-case scenario, unless the afterlife was far more boring than anyone believed. Waking up in her quarters instead of the infirmary pushed her past her worst-case scenarios. Nothing hurt. Her body presented no evidence of injections or medical patch application. She wasn't hurt. What about her crew? She couldn't be so quick to assume everything was all right. The ship wasn't maneuvering or shaking from weapons fire and nearby explosions. She doubted her people would pull her out of her flight suit and tuck her into a
Sample complete. Ready to continue?